It's Wednesday, November 19th, 2014, and this is the Product Mentor Talk. Today we're joined by one of our mentors, Jon Stross, president and co-founder of Greenhouse Software. And he's going to lead a talk today on hiring product managers, something that I know a lot of you are very interested in. So just allow me to just briefly explain the format here. People you see kind of joining us in the room along the bottom of your screen, these are mentors and mentees in the Product Mentor program. There's others of you who are joining us either through the product group, our YouTube channel, or perhaps through our live link, theproductmentor.com/live. If you're joining us, you can ask questions of Jon throughout the whole talk, and I'll be passing along those questions to him in semi-real time. If you to be able to submit those questions through our Google Moderator channel, just submit them to theproductmentor.com/live. On the bottom of that page, you'll see a Google Moderator channel. So definitely submit them, and I will pass them on to Jon as they come in. What we'll do right now is we'll just briefly just kind of do some quick intros. So I'm going to start with you, Sarah.
Hi, I am Sarah Barkey. I work at a small company called Applico. We make apps and platforms for the people, and I am a mentee.
Outstanding. And Irfan?
Hi, I'm Irfan. I'm a product manager at Bookspan. We run about 19 different online e-commerce websites / clubs, and I am a mentee.
Awesome. I'm Jeremy Horn, aka the Product Guy. I'll be moderating for this talk today. I'm about to hand it over to Jon, who can kind of introduce himself and kick off the discussion on hiring product managers. Jon, take it away.
All right. Thanks, Jeremy, and thanks for having me. I'm going to just screen share here and pull this up. So let's see. About me, I'm a experienced product manager, many years, both in San Francisco and New York, working on consumer companies. I was one of the original product manager at Baby Center. Also an enterprise software company called Merced Systems. I then did an international thing, hiring people in about 20 different countries, and building a big global business. And I'm currently co-founded a company called Greenhouse, which is helping companies learn how to manage their recruiting process better, hence today's talk. So through all these experiences, I've hired a bunch of product managers and hope to bring some of that wisdom to you today. So basically what I wanted to do today is start with basic philosophy. How should you run your recruiting process? Which isn't really about hiring product managers, it's about hiring anyone. How should you interview? How should you source? I think I'd say most companies, most people I talk to would say, yeah, we're terrible at it. We do terrible interviews, we don't know how to source, we don't know what we're doing, and we're struggling with our results. I talk to most candidates and they say, oh, the interview process is terrible, people ask terrible questions. So I wanted to start with just a basic philosophy of like, what is a good way to run a recruiting process, both interviewing and sourcing? From there we'll say, okay, well given that process, what's a good plan to hire a product manager? What should you be looking for? How do you interview for those things? Where do you find them? And that's the content for the talk today. I know I've talked to other folks in the product group, like at the meetups, and people say, how do I get a job as a product manager? Not really today's talk. Maybe you'll get an angle on it from what I talk about, but this is more aimed at the hiring team of how they hire. So, okay, basic philosophy of recruiting. I'm going to break it down into interviewing and sourcing. So interviewing is, once you have a pack of candidates, how do you select which one to hire? And sourcing is, how do you find that pack of candidates in the first place? So with interviewing, what you typically see is there's lots of folklore and habit, right? You ask people how they interview, and they say, well, I like this one question. It seems to work for me. And maybe that question has nothing to do with what that role is about, right? You routinely have people who are sitting in interviews, instead of like listening to the candidate, they're brainstorming what the next question is that they're going to ask, right? They come out and they say, well, you know, I kind of chit-chatted for a while. The person seemed nice. They play lacrosse. I play lacrosse. What could go wrong? What I'd say is that's pretty terrible. That's a bad way to make a really important decision. You go to most companies, they have like a really profound way that they buy like office furniture. They say, oh, we've got a whole rec process. We get price comparisons. It's really thought out. And then when they go and say, how do we hire people? Like far more important acquisition process, and it's this. They're kind of making it up as they go. So I'd say, what's the right way to do it? the notion of structured interviewing.
John, we just had a question come in from Chuck. So as I ask, you kind of swap back to video there. So the question from Chuck in New York City is just a quick one. How important is a CS background to get into product management?
That's a good question. I'm going to totally answer that. I think what I wanted to start with is like the general philosophy of recruiting, and I'm going to go directly into that and say, what should you look for in a product manager, right? What things are important and what things are not important, and answer that exactly. Right?
Excellent. Excellent. So Chuck, stay tuned. He's coming to that question in just a moment. And for the rest of you who are just joining us, you can also submit your questions, and I'll jump in and pass them along to John at theproductmentor.com/live, and I'll pass it on through. So back to you, John.
Okay. So the concept we're talking about here is structured interviewing. This isn't some secret. This isn't something that I made up. This is like, there's tons of books, tons of blog posts out there. And the general process is, or the general idea is there's two things. One is have each candidate follow the same process. Don't make it up for each candidate as you go. If every candidate goes through the same process, it's one, more fair for them, but two, it's easier to get kind of an apples-to-apples comparison. If you ask the same question of 10 different candidates, it's much easier to calibrate between them and see who did a good job than it is to if you're just asking totally different questions of different people. It also gives you good clarity on where you are in your process. When a candidate says, so what happens next? Instead of saying, I'm not sure, you'll probably hear from us soon, which candidates hate. You're able to say, well, here's where you are in the process. If you make it to the next step, we'll be inviting you back in a week, and after that, we make offers. The number one thing you hear from candidates when you ask them about their experience and how much they like working at or they like interviewing or not, or why they choose to work for one company or not, is if you don't set their expectations, if you let them go dark, they get really upset. And if you don't have a good structured process, it's hard to tell them what comes next. So that's kind of phase one, or principle one. The second one is that at each interview or each interaction you have with them, have a clear purpose. So rather than asking each of your interviewers to walk in to the room and say, what do you think? Should we hire this person? And they have to kind of figure everything out. You say, actually, come up with a really specific purpose. Say, these are the 3 skills that you as an interviewer are supposed to figure out. Right? Maybe some other interviewer, you give them 3 personality traits. But the key thing is that each person is going in with a plan. They know what it is they're trying to figure out, and they know how they're going to figure it out. Otherwise, it's easy to kind of get snowed, right? You go in, somebody's charismatic, candidate takes control of the interview, tells lots of good stories. You're like, yeah, she seemed great. And that's how the bad hiring decisions get made, right? Maybe you get so impressed by one skill that you miss all these other personality traits that you should have been looking for. So that's the general idea, is you say every candidate goes through the same process. Every step of the process has a specific purpose. Now, how do you do that? Okay, so the first thing is you have to define what it is you're looking for. So you're looking at skills. What can the person do? For a product manager, it's things like they're going to have to go spec things. Personality traits, who are they? What do they like, right? Style, fit, and motivation. And then qualifications and details. So maybe what is it they've achieved? Also, really important details. Can you afford them, right? Do they need a visa? Are they available? Would you have to relocate them? Are they willing to travel? Right? These are all basic things that you do have to ask at some point in the process. So as you design your interview process, you got to make sure all of these things are covered. Okay? So when we talk to folks about what's the technique to develop this, we'd say is, think of the best product managers you've worked with. What skills did they have? What personality traits did they have? Think of, what is it they have to do, right? And you really write down specifically, what are the things they're going to do? How are they going to be measured? And based on those things, what skills and personality traits do they need, right? It's very tempting sometimes if you're making this list to write out 50 different things. And you end up with this kind of unicorn of I need this person with 22 different personality traits. It's yeah, but you've never met a single person that has all of those. So part of doing this candidate profile is making choices, right? Is making trade-offs and saying what's really crucial and what can I live without, right? And a key thing is don't confuse this with the job ad that goes live on your website, right, or that you post on LinkedIn. That's an ad, right? The thing you put up live publicly to the world is an ad meant to attract the right candidates. That is overlap, but it's very different than what this is. This is a scorecard. This is saying when you interview, what is it you're going to look for, okay? So now that you have this candidate profile and you're saying this is what we're going to look for, the next question is, how do you interview for those things?
So I had another question just come in, John, from Sarah. So I'm going to hand it over to Sarah to ask her question directly.
Hello. Just wondering, how important, case interviewing was. In business school, it was very important for marketing and management and all those kind of things, especially consulting.
Mm-hmm.
But I've seen a very strong mix between product manager interviews having cases and some just not even caring about them.
Yeah, it's a good question, and that's actually the topic of this slide. Basically, is like, how do you test for things, right? And so I think what Sarah's referring to is like, for skills or consultant interviews, frequently cases, right? Or it may be something that's kind of like testing your thought process, like how many ping pong balls would fit in an airplane, or maybe like, here's an actual problem, how would you solve it? And so what I'd say is like, for those different types of things, there's different ways to test for skills versus personality traits versus qualifications. For skills, at the beginning, you might probe for knowledge, right? So maybe if you're trying to see if somebody, like with a developer, you'd ask them like basic questions. Do they know how to, they know about various languages, they know about various concepts. And it's more like probing, like, do they have basic knowledge? Later, you do practical testing. You say, listen, if you're going to program at this company, I'm going to watch you program. I'm going to make sure you can do it. And my general thing is, like, yeah, if there's a skill you're looking for, one of the best ways to do it is to make them demonstrate that skill. So if I'm hiring a salesperson, they're absolutely going to sell me something in the interview. If I'm hiring a writer, they're absolutely writing something. Probably not in the interview, probably like as a take-home test. And so for product managers, yeah, I'd do it. I'd probably do it as a take-home test. I was actually was going to mention that later when I talk about product managers generally, but my general bias is like, yeah, if there's a skill that you want, you should test for it. Don't take somebody's word for it. Does that answer the question? Is that helpful, Sarah? Sure. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, enthusiastically.
All right. Good question. So personality traits, I think behavioral interviews is the key thing there. So I don't if people don't know what that is, the general concept of a behavioral interview is that the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So if you're saying, I want somebody who collaborates well, that's a really important personality trait. Rather than asking, so situation, how would you act? Would you collaborate, right? It's really easy to game those questions. Somebody can kind of guess what you're trying to get at, and they just tell you what you want to hear. So what you ask instead is, tell me about a time in the past that you did collaborate well. And then however they answer, dig in. Try to get to the real truth of it. Right? What you find is, if you're asking somebody some hypothetical, it's really easy for them just to guess what you want and tell you what you want to hear. If you're asking them for a real situation, like give me the details, it's harder to make it up as you go, and they end up kind of revealing a lot of things. So I'm thinking of like, we're hiring an account manager or customer success and asking some questions around how do you deal with like a difficult customer. And there's some people you interview and they're like, yeah, I've done this hundreds of times. Here's how I think, like, here's how I've done it. They tell me 5 stories of how people they saved, people that they didn't save. You ask other people, and they're like, well, here's what I think I would do. And it's like, it's so easy to tell those folks apart of like, who's done it, who really has a way of thinking about dealing with the situation versus who's kind of making it up as you go. So it's a really important concept, I would say, like, for interviewing in general is, other than like if you're doing a practical test where you're saying, how would you solve this problem? If you're looking for personality traits, I'd really say like look for past behavior much more than asking them to kind of make it up as they go. It's also a good thing to do in reference checks. I think people always talk about reference checks like, oh, it's hard to do a reference check because the candidate gives you the person they used to work for that obviously loves them, so they're not going to say anything bad, so you don't really get anything out of it. And it's like, well, right, if you call that person and say, so do you recommend Sarah? Of course they're going to say yes, otherwise she wouldn't have given you their name, right? So what you can do instead is say like, so when I talk to, so yes, you ask a candidate, like, what's this person going to say about you? Are they going to say that you don't ask right or wrong answers. Are they going to say you're more team-oriented, or let's say you're a big problem solver, or you just like put your head down and get stuff done? Or some kind of continuum question. And then you go and ask the reference. So when I ask the candidate what they'd say, here's what they told me. Do you agree with that? And it kind of gives the reference the ability to be a little bit more honest and not say something bad, but you can get at some like real truths there when you kind of check personality traits and say, so It's not so much like, are they a nice person, but like, how would you say, are they more like A or more like B? Qualifications and details, so that's a thing you can usually do early. Like you can pre-qualify with a lot of things on the resume, obviously. Also, you can do kind of early, like in a phone screen. I think something I always counsel people is like, in early stage, you can do a 15-minute phone screen where you just see if the person's available. Are they vaguely qualified? Do they have any interest in this actual job? You'll probably knock out half the people, and that's a lot of downstream interviews you don't have to do. The worst thing is when you interview somebody like 6 times and you get to the end and realize you can't afford them and they're not actually available for 6 months. And you're like, well, why did we just waste all of that time with that person? Right? So those are general kind of, like if you're going through your process, you've written down your scorecard of here are the things we're looking for in this role. Then you've taken each of those things and said, how are we going to test for them by writing these interviews? And then basically you align those interviews or those questions onto a bunch of interview stages. Right? So you're going to say at the application review stage, I'm going to look at their application, I'm going to look at their resume, see do they have the basic qualifications, do they at least report having some of the skills. Then maybe I do a phone screen, it's very short, knock out people based on just like very obvious things, make sure they can basically communicate, have interest in this actual job. At that point, maybe do a phone interview, and obviously this changes for everybody what they do. Maybe at that point you do a phone interview, go deeper, do a bunch of behavioral questions, those are easy to do on the phone. Maybe a take-home test after that, where you do your case interview, and then in person you come in and you do culture fit interviews. You probably do skills interviews. The whole time, hopefully, you're trying to sell them. It's a really important point through this process. I think people look at interviewing as 100 people applied, and I have to figure out which one I want to hire. But equally as part of that is you look at each of those people and like they're trying to decide whether they want to take a job with you, right? If you're hiring an awesome product manager in New York City, they probably have other offers. There's a lot of companies out there trying to hire amazing product managers, right? So a point I always try to make to companies and hiring managers is that very few companies actually have a hiring brand, right? Very few companies can you say, oh, I've heard what it's like to work there. Like maybe Google, like we've all heard what it's like to work at Google. But even other famous companies, like I don't know what it's like to work at Pinterest or Airbnb. I know some people who work there, maybe I could ask them. But for the most part, when I make that decision to take a job at their company, almost everything I know about working there is what I learned in the interview process. So I see, like, did they ask me hard questions? Did I feel challenged? Were the people on time? Were they nice? Were they prepared? Did they seem interested in being there? Do I feel like they got a good sense of who I am and what my skills are and why I'd fit? Do I have a good sense of what I would do in that job and whether I'd get to grow and learn? So it's a really important thing as you think about this whole process and the questions you're asking is obviously like selling the candidate the whole way. And also like challenging the candidate and trying to, like usually good people get really excited about that. And so that's the thing when I always coach folks, they're putting interview processes together is like, one, don't think of it just as a way to select the right person, also think of it as you're selling everybody along the way. Also for that, one person you hire, there's 50 other people you didn't hire, they all go off into the world with an opinion about your company and tell people. So everybody as they go through, like be courteous, send rejection emails, be timely. It does make a difference, and it's hard, right? It's hard to get it right for everybody, but like it does make a big difference. So I think that's my last spiel on interviewing. I'm now going to go over and talk about sourcing in general. So with sourcing, it's a lot of the same thing. A lot of folklore and habit. You say, where do you get candidates? They say, well, for me, I like to buy job ads on LinkedIn. I'm like, okay. Have you tried anything else? They're like, no, last time I found a good person on LinkedIn. And then you talk to somebody else, they're like, oh, I bought a job ad on LinkedIn, didn't get anybody. You're like, okay. So you guys have both concluded that you figured it out. Like, a very typical thing we talk to people, they say, well, I bought a job ad on LinkedIn. I asked my company if there were any referrals and didn't get any. So I kind of gave up and hired an agency. And now I kind of hate my agency. They just send me a bunch of garbage candidates, and they're all terrible. And if I hire one, I have to pay them a fortune. And say that's basically not how you source. That's like a recipe for failure. So I think the first principle of sourcing is like all sourcing problems can be solved, or really all recruiting problems can be solved by more sourcing activity. The more stuff you do, the more results you will get, is the general rule. So the first thing is use a large set of channels, right? There's a lot of different things you can do to find candidates. It's not simply like you can buy job ads, you can use social media, referrals, agencies, prospecting, events, campus recruiting, there's tons of different things. The more different things you try, the better off you're going to do. 2 is attribute candidate flows. Like, make sure you know where the candidates you're getting are coming from and measure the impact of them. Know where are you getting your, not just how many candidates, but where are you getting your best candidates from. And then last is like adjust your message and approach and campaign. And this sounds kind of obvious. Very few people do this though, right? And think of it as marketing, right? Like it's kind of a cliche in recruiting now, is that recruiting is marketing. But really the idea there is that in marketing we have all this sophistication about how we go after and try to find customers, right? You'd never like buy an ad on Google and let it sit there for a month. It's like, no, you A/B test constantly. You try different keywords, you try different messaging, and you see what works, right? There's so much sophistication like an ad tech, the real-time bidding, all this stuff that's happening around trying to market in such a sophisticated way to find customers. And yet when you ask people how they find candidates, it's so unsophisticated. Like, well, I bought a job ad, it didn't work. LinkedIn must be terrible. It's like, well, did you A/B test that ad? Did you look at like the quality of people you did get from it? Just because you didn't get somebody hired, you might have gotten actually really good candidates. So I'd say is like, treat it like a marketing campaign. Try different campaigns, try different messages, try things across many different channels, and you're much likely to get better results, right? So that's the basics of kind of my recruiting spiel in general. Now I'm going to just dive in and start talking about, so okay, if you're going to hire a product manager, what are the things you should look for? I'll caution, like, these are some of my opinions, right? These are things that I've looked at and said from all the best product managers I've worked with or hired, these are some of the things I've found. So when I go and look for a product manager, these are the things I'd want. It's possible you're going to look and say, oh, I want different things. But for me, something that, I'll just talk about each of these. So like smart, raw intellectual horsepower, like you can't be a dim product manager. It's a really hard job. You got to deal with people from all different parts of a company. You have to be technically savvy, marketing savvy. You have to have a high emotional intelligence, deal with all these people. Like, I've never met a great product manager who wasn't really smart. 2, get shit done, right? Ultimately, I always think of the product manager and say, like, in the engine that is a software development organization, you're either the oil that makes everything go smooth, or you're the sand that makes everything stop. When people say, oh, well, you know, we didn't ship because we didn't have enough resources, we didn't have enough time, we had too many features, we couldn't decide on things. I'm like, yeah, every project doesn't have enough resources. Every project doesn't have enough time. Every project has too many features and ambition. You either get it done or you don't, right? So some folks are able to like kind of thread the needle and get through impossible circumstances and get hard things done, and some people can't. And I want the folks who can get stuff done. It is a thing you can interview for, and you typically see there are folks who thrive in that, and they have a lot of pride over like the hard things they've accomplished, projects that no one would think was possible, and they were able to get it done, versus other folks who make excuses. And so you see that pretty quickly when you interview. Technical competence. This is a question earlier: is do you have to have a CS degree? I remember talking to folks at Microsoft long ago where they said, yeah, product managers are old programmers. And MBA types, you know, people who are business folks who don't have that programming, they're product planners. That was like 15 years ago. I'm not sure that's still true there. There are other places where they say, no, you don't have to be a programmer. My view is like, no, you don't have to be a programmer, but you absolutely have to have a technical competence. You have to be able to like converse with the programmers and have them respect you, right? If they think that they have to like dumb everything down to talk to you, you're in trouble. I mean, a lot of the magic of great product management is when you write your requirements, you figure out all the stuff that you want, you sit down with the engineers and they say that's going to take 3 months, and you have to figure out how do you do it in 3 weeks. What is it you can give on? What are the features that you're allowed that you think, you know what, I can give on that and that'll make it way easier. And that kind of negotiation that happens with the engineers to figure out what are the things that make this hard and how can we make it easier. If you can't participate in that at all, it's real trouble. I always think like you need to be able to have enough competence that you can understand what they're talking about, because you also have in your head which features are most important and which ones you can give on. So for me, I don't have a CS degree, can't code a lick, but if you talk to engineers, any place I've worked, they'd say, oh yeah, he's very technical, right? So So hopefully that answers that question from earlier. Product instincts. So it's the thing where some people have really good instincts about what's a good product idea and what's not. Right? Every day I'm bombarded with feature requests from different customers, and at some point you have to have the taste of which of these are good ideas and which ones aren't. Which of these are actually representative? A lot of people probably want that, and which of these are just one-offs that only a few people want. Right? Which, when you've got some feature that you want to do and you're trying to stuff it into a release and you're not going to get everything, what can you trade off? What can you get rid of? And so there's an instinct thing there, and some people have it and some people don't. Very important. Another one, influence people that they don't manage. So typical thing is most product managers, you're working with engineers, QA people, marketing people, designers, sales, and usually none of them work for you. Right? So in some ways you're very powerful, in some ways you're totally not powerful. And so ultimately the way you get stuff done is because you're influencing folks. You can't slam your shoe on the table and say, do it because I said so. I will say after a career in product management, I'm now a co-founder, so people actually do work for me. It's way better. It makes it way easier. But unfortunately, I went the first 15 years of my career without that. And so it's more, this is a trait, right? Is this somebody that people will follow even if they don't have to? Right? Other things, usually company-specific traits that folks are looking for. At our company, we're always looking for people who want this stage of company. Right? It's dangerous for us to take a 1,000-person company, or a person who's worked at a 1,000-person place is really comfortable there. It's also dangerous for us to take somebody who wants to work at a 4-person company and be one of the first people, because we're we're at 45 people, we're in the middle. Other things we were looking for people who are authentic or collaborative. So there's always things there that we're looking for. So those are the things I tend to look for. I'm sure other people have different lists, but that's a start. Things that I think are a little bit overrated, and maybe these will be a little bit controversial, but domain expertise I typically find super overrated. For me,
So, John, we've had some questions coming.
Go for it.
So this one from Michael. I'll do my best with the question here. Michael from New York City is asking, as I do, so you can jump back to, there you go. Michael from New York City is asking, what are the most important things to put in a product management portfolio?
Can you spit in terms of what you're asking the person to submit, or what do you mean?
Just reading off the question. I'd say go with your gut.
I mean, if you're asking for a portfolio from somebody, or I guess you're a candidate being asked for a portfolio, show what you're proud of, right? I mean, it's a very typical question I'm going to ask a product manager is, what's the thing you're most proud of that you built? And when somebody can't answer that, it's a real red flag if they're an experienced person.
Okay.
Yeah, hopefully that.
So we got another question from Bill in New York City. Do you often see IT project managers making the move to being a product manager? Seems that there's a fair bit of overlap in the skill sets.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think something you see, and why it's always a hard position to hire and interview for, is that product manager means very different things at different companies, right? There's some companies who just have project management, and other ones who have product management. There are ones who split product management between different roles. So what I'd say is if you're interviewing at a company, I would absolutely ask, what does product management do at your company? Because I wouldn't take that for granted. And when I'm interviewing, I absolutely ask people, so what did a product manager do at your company? What did you do? And I find huge variation, much more than if I was interviewing a Java programmer, they typically say, yeah, I wrote Java. If I say I'm interviewing a product manager, it's off the wall. So IT project management, sure, there are definitely people that you talk to, you're like, oh, that sounds like a product manager to me. But at their company, it was called something different.
Okay. We've got another question, this one from Chris in New York. How do you measure a candidate's product instinct?
Oh, yeah, I think that's the next slide.
Awesome. Well, then let me hand it back to you.
All right. Okay. Oh, actually, let me finish this slide and give my rants about MBAs, and then we'll go on to how do you test for product instincts. Yeah, so things are overrated. So for me, domain expertise is super overrated. I built the leading baby website in the world to this day. I didn't have a baby until about 4 weeks ago. Next company was call center performance management. I'd never worked in a call center, right? This current company is recruiting. I haven't been a recruiter, right? I think you can get away without it because I think what you do as a product manager, you go talk to tons of people. So my current company, I've talked to hundreds of recruiters now about how they do their job, and I have a great wide perspective about how different people in different industries at different sizes of company hiring for different things do their job. What I find is that I talk to folks who have worked in recruiting software for a long time, and they've got a lot of biases based on the things they've already built. So in some ways, domain expertise can actually play against you because you come in with all these biases of what you already know. Whereas when you kind of approach the thing kind of more generically or more with a blank slate, you're more open to what you find. I also think sometimes with product managers, they think that their job is to know all the answers and have all the vision. And if you have domain expertise, then you feel like you do know all the answers. If you approach it and you say, I don't know all the answers, then you listen to everybody a bit better, right? So I'm very free, like a greenhouse here, like I'm the product person, I lead what it is we're building. But that said, I'm not actually the visionary. My co-founder, the CEO, who's out doing sales, he actually has in his gut much more domain expertise than me on this topic. And he has much more vision. So I kind of translate his vision and build stuff. And I think that's fine. So I think domain expertise you can kind of trade off on. MBAs, to me, is a real mixed bag. I think there's a lot of places where it's, oh, wow, they just graduated from Stanford with an MBA. They must be the perfect hire. What I've found, and this is going to be a gross generalization, so hopefully people won't be too upset with me, is there's also in product management an element of humility. It's you have to work with all these different people. You kind of have to take a lot of shit sometimes. You usually have to disappoint a lot of people. You can't say yes to everybody. You have to go and admit what you don't know and ask a lot of questions. And especially recent MBA grads, especially that I've hired, and maybe it's just my personal bias now, didn't have that. They wanted to be the CEO, and so they failed miserably. So I would say an MBA doesn't mean it's a ticket to being a great product manager. Years of experience, I generally struggle hiring really junior product managers because I think it's such a hard job. It's hard to do it with no experience. But merely because somebody's done it for 10 years doesn't mean that they're great at it. There's a lot I'd much rather hire the athlete who has all the skills, or at least the underlying traits, than the person who's simply done the job.
Yep. So we just had another question come in from Anish in New York City. And Anish says, most companies look for 3 to 5 years of real product management experience. I think this speaks to a little bit of what you were just saying. How would you perceive a candidate with less than that if they submitted their resume to you?
It depends on what I'm hiring for. If I was hiring for a experienced product manager person, it's really hard to hire somebody with way less experience than that. That said, I think there are junior roles, right? You can hire a junior person to do stuff. The story here, I just hired somebody here as a junior product manager. It was an internal hire, right? It was somebody that he submitted his resume, and he had been I think doing visa applications at a law firm as a paralegal, right? And so we hired him in customer support because he was just wicked smart. So I hired him in customer support and said, answer online chat for our product. And after a bunch of months, it was clear he knew the product better than anybody. Engineers all respected him. He was respected by everybody in the company. He had great product instincts. I super trusted him. So I turned him into a junior product manager. Amazing hire. I couldn't possibly have hired him off his resume originally. So for me, internal hires is a great way to get junior product managers.
Great, great. So that's all the questions we have at the moment. But for those of you who would like to submit your questions to Jon, for me to pass them along in semi-real time, submit your questions to theproductmentor.com/live. Post them to that Google Moderator channel, and I will pass them along. Back to you, Jon.
Okay. So getting to how should you interview for those traits. So as we said, if we said those are the things that we're looking for, so how do you interview for those? So these are questions I either brainstormed or I brazenly stole from the blog post in this URL here at the bottom. To be clear, interview questions aren't proprietary. You can Google interview questions and come up with great ones quite quickly. But these were some ones I pulled. Yeah, these are questions I've definitely asked or do ask. Product instincts, the one somebody asked about. Here are some good ones. You'll see generally these are all asking about history, right? These are all saying like, what's something you've accomplished, what's something you've done, more than how would you handle a situation. I put here take-home test to Sarah's question around like around doing case interview. Like, yeah, I would do that. I guess I didn't have to do it here because we did an internal hire, but like asking somebody to spec a feature. One thing I generally do with that, or we do here when we do take-home tests, is don't make it an actual real feature, right? Because if you do a thing where you say, okay, spec this feature for my product, you know so much more about your product and your market and your customer than some candidate will, that whatever they do, it's clearly going to fall short, and you're going to judge them because they don't have the perfect domain knowledge, which isn't really what you're testing for. So a lot of times it's like, no, make up a feature like on a product that everyone knows, right? So you're not actually testing their domain knowledge, you're testing their ability to think through a feature. And say like, well, do they think about not just how it looks to the user, but like, how is it going to be administered on the back end? How are you going to measure its success? Did they talk through where's the goal of the feature? Or do they merely kind of say, well, you know, I put some buttons on the page, right? It's like, the idea is like not that you're going to get like the perfect spec in the end, but you're just trying to like get at what somebody thinking, or how does somebody think about things. And generally, if you give if you find 10 random people who apply for your job and ask them to spec a feature, you'll be amazed at the variety of stuff that you get. And that's true for really most of these questions, right? It's always amazing, like with human beings in general, how different they'll answer what seems like very simple questions. So let's see. I don't think I want to read through all of these, but that's the general, yeah. These are all things, I mean, and honestly, like, I didn't have all these in my head. I just went and started Googling and like came up with stuff. So doing that exercise of saying, well, what are the skills we care about? What are the personality traits we care about? And then looking around for questions or brainstorming questions, it's not a thing that's going to take you 3 days, right? In half an hour, you're going to generate a whole great list of questions. And then what you do is like you try them. And after you interview a bunch of candidates, you find, geez, like, we rated these people as high, but I actually don't think they're good. It's like, well, maybe we're asking the wrong questions, right? Maybe you're having multiple people do the same interview and coming up with totally different conclusions. So you can always iterate and kind of like improve your process as you go, or maybe after you make a hire, say, what do we learn from this hiring process? What questions will we do differently next time? So typically when we're hiring some new role we've never hired before, it's hard to get it perfect the first time. So you put somebody through the process and you see, well, what went well, what didn't. You change your questions, you swap in new ones, find ones that work for you, and go from there. So, next section is, so where do you find those product managers? So we're talking about sourcing. So as I said, like, here's tons of different strategies of what you could do, right? If I were hiring a product manager today, like, I would be at Jeremy's meetup, and I would absolutely be standing up at the beginning saying, I'm hiring a product manager, and I expect to meet 20 candidates that day. That's super easy. Right? I talked about internal candidates. I think especially for junior people, it's really hard to just read somebody's resume and see that they're going to have those natural skills. If you get to work around somebody, hiring junior folks out of your customer support group, it's not crazy. I've done that throughout my career, and they've worked well. Referrals is one I always like to talk about. People say, oh, like referrals are so great, right? Like generally referrals stay longer. They're more committed to the company. 5 referrals is probably worth 100 candidates that applied off of the internet. And yet most companies don't get as many referrals as they want. They say, why didn't I get referrals? And so the tip we always talk about is, the way people typically do referrals, they send an email, a mass email to the company saying, hey, we're looking for a product manager. They have to have 3 to 5 years experience. They have to have this domain expertise. They should be left-handed and over 5 feet tall. Does anybody know anyone? And the email is, of course, routinely ignored. Right? Because you've asked a yes or no question, you've asked it abstractly over email, and you've asked it to a mass of people. Right? So basically the way to get referrals is to do everything the opposite. Go talk to somebody one-on-one, not digitally, talk to them individually, and don't ask a yes or no question. Right? If you give them the out of saying, do you know this perfect unicorn, they're going to say no. Right? So instead you say, you basically say, I'm not leaving without a name. So if you don't know the perfect person, who's the best person you've ever worked with? I don't care if they're available. I don't care if they don't live in this town. Smart people know smart people, right? And you ask the question, and then you be quiet. Because people hate silence, and eventually they're going to give up a name, right? If I really wanted to, I bet I could get Jeremy to give up a name right now. I'm not going to do it though, because he said don't make it too interactive. It is like a thing that actually works. If anybody's gone to like sales training, there's similar stuff there. There's similar techniques there. The idea with referrals, like it really does work. If you just go to somebody and you basically say like, yeah, I'm not leaving until I get a name, or you have that attitude, you will get a name, right? Don't make them come up with the perfect person who's ready to start tomorrow. Make them come up with somebody. Sit down and look through LinkedIn with them, their first-degree connection. So if you ask people like, oh, who's a great product manager, they can think of like 10 people. You go sit down with them and look through their LinkedIn first-degree connections, they have 400 people. They're like, oh, I forgot about half these people, right? It'll jar their memory. It's a really easy way to get more referrals. Let's see. Other ones. Yeah, I'm going to skip these. Okay, so that was like the content of the spiel. I'm sure I have other rants that I'm not remembering, but I think that was what I was trying to get through today.
Cool. So we do have another question that just came in. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name, but I think it's Chul from New York, New York. Chul says, Facebook and some companies like to hire management consultants. Some other companies prefer more tech-oriented people. What's your opinion?
I mean, there's definitely a culture per company, so I don't know if there's a right answer or a wrong answer. I guess when I think, I'm just thinking through like all the product managers I've hired and worked with, and I would say probably the more tech-minded people, honestly. It also depends on like what product you're building, right? Like I always come from this mindset of like building software and internet products, but I always go to the product meetups and find that like most people there aren't building that. They're building physical products or something else. So like you got to be really thoughtful about what you're actually building. But I've seen so many product managers fail because they just didn't pass that basic technical competence, and they didn't have the confidence of the tech people they were working with. And there's just no way to do the job in that sense. So that's my general gut, is I wanted somebody who like technically can like keep up.
All right. Got a question now from Adam in New York City. And Adam asks, would you consider a senior sales account person with solution sales expertise for a product manager role?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'd like to think I'm not gonna like. I mean, if I know the person, I've been working with them in this totally different role, would I say sure? Like, you'd be great. I guess my general thing with product managers is I've always tried to like. I always actually bias to be like internal. So if I see somebody in some different department who I think has the skills or has the talents to do it, sure. Like I'm gonna go grab them and convince them that they need to be a product manager. If somebody if I was looking through 30 resumes and one of them was a sales solution engineer and everybody else is a product manager, like, you know, it's gonna be harder.
Cool. So Chris just had a comment that he wanted me to pass on to you. Chris from New York said a great bit. He's complimenting you on a great bit on referrals, and he will definitely implement that in the future. And thanks.
Good.
Chris in New York. Cool. I'm just seeing if there's any other questions. So it looks like that's all the questions that we have right now. So as always, the presentation that John went through will be posted to our SlideShare channel. And thank you to our speaker, Jon Stross, president and co-founder of Greenhouse Software, for today's discussion on hiring product managers. And even though it was a lot about hiring product managers, I think it really works both ways. Those of you who are looking to get a product management job, just pay attention to what the people interviewing you should be asking you and how they should be interviewing you. And a big thank you from me, Jeremy Horn, the product guy, and everyone else who joined us today, and the product mentor. And don't forget, if you're interested in being a product mentor like John, to product people of all sorts, then please sign up today at theproductmentor.com. And also, if you're looking to fill a product job with a great product person, wow, how topical today, visit our very own, and it's free for everyone, job board. It's all about connecting product people to great product jobs. And you can take advantage of that, go to theproductjobs.com. And with that said, see you guys all next time. Bye.